So here's the thing. Before we start, like in the part 1 video, we need to start with a disclaimer. The contents of this season video involve discussion of child abuse as it relates to the content of the show. If that is something that will trigger you, please skip this one. As you might imagine, the response to the release of the first season of Teen Wolf was huge. So when it came time to make the second season, they doubled down on all the things that the audience loved. At this point in the series, they're still shooting the show in Georgia, and the cast and crew remained mostly the same, with some new additions. Let's jump into the meat and potatoes of the episode. The first episode of Season 2 starts pretty much right after the end of the first season. Jackson is freshly bitten by Derek and he emerges from some water in the middle of the woods with a bite on his side. It seems he has finally gotten exactly what he wanted. Between seasons, Scott and Allison had some issues with Allison's werewolf hunter parents, and now we jump forward a bit and the two are seeing each other in secret. Lydia has mostly recovered from the injuries she got from Peter in the last few episodes of the first season. As she goes to take a shower, she has a disgusting hallucination, likely connected to Peter biting her, and disappears from the hospital. Scott shows up at the hospital and uses her scent to track her in the woods. It's important that he finds her first, since the hunters will also be looking for her, and they know she's been bitten by an alpha. At the local cemetery, we meet a new character and fan favorite, Isaac Leahy, played by Daniel Sharman. He works at the cemetery with his father, and he's digging a grave for an upcoming funeral. It turns out this is the funeral for Kate Argent, who we know was killed in the Season 1 finale. As he's digging, he uses the mirror to check out some bruises on his face before his backhoe is tipped over and he falls into the grave. He hears some noises, but before we get confirmation on what they're from, Derek shows up and helps Isaac out of the hole. The next morning, we learn that something or someone stole the liver from one of the bodies in the graveyard. We also get some implications that Isaac's bruises are from his father. Yikes. At school, Jackson is riding a high now that he was bitten and knows that he will get the same abilities that Scott has. Of course, because he's a jerk, he starts off the season by being really nasty to a homeless man. Stiles immediately gets detention from Mr. Harris, and Mr. Harris tells him that he'll be taking him in as a pet project for the rest of the semester, but this ultimately doesn't really go anywhere. Jackson has his own issues. He gets a nosebleed of strange black blood, and when Derek sees what's happening, he knows something's wrong. It seems his body is fighting the bite. Later, at Kate's funeral, we meet Matt, played by Stephen Lunsford, who is taking pictures of Allison against the police's wishes. We also meet Chris Argent's father, Gerard, who you can immediately tell is a nasty man. It is not that easy to snap an SD card. Scott and Stiles get busted at the funeral by Sheriff Stilinski, and they overhear on the radio that another body has been torn up on the way to the hospital. If that is Lydia who is turning into a werewolf, she might have blood on her hands. Thankfully, Stiles and the sheriff run into Lydia in the woods and take her back to the hospital. She seems mostly okay, if a little frazzled. While he was still looking for Lydia, Scott follows the scent but runs into a different werewolf in the woods. It turns out the homeless man who Jackson belittled is the werewolf that has been mutilating all these bodies. But he's only been taking from bodies that are already dead. Derek shows up and hides with Scott just as the strange werewolf gets caught in a snare trap. The hunters show up, led by Grandpa Gerard, who cut him in half despite the fact that he hasn't actually killed anyone. At this point, we already know about alphas and betas, but according to Gerard, this guy was an omega. Unlike in fanfiction, in Teen Wolf, an omega is just any werewolf that has no pack. In this show's lore, being a lone wolf makes it harder to control yourself. When the hunters leave, Derek tries to tell Scott that this is why wolves live in packs, but Scott does not want to join up with Derek. As the episode ends, Isaac shows up at Derek's new living space. He's officially upgraded from burned down house to abandoned train warehouse. It's a good start to the season, and we've already introduced a few of our biggest questions for the whole season. Will Scott and Allison's relationship survive? Will Scott and Derek survive the hunters? And what exactly is going on with both Lydia and Jackson? We also get a look at some of our new characters, like Isaac, and we have hints dropping about possible plot lines for Stiles, as well as the plotline with the photographer Matt and Allison. It wasn't mentioned in the recap, but we also get a little bit of a look at Allison's relationship with her mother, and we know that they are quite close, but that Mrs. Argent has shown herself to be way more strict about this whole werewolf thing than we might have thought. In the next episode, we start off with a look into Isaac's home life. As you might have picked up from the first one, it's not great. Their conversation quickly turns abusive, and when Isaac shows that he may have some super werewolf healing powers, he runs out of the house. His dad follows, only to get mauled by a mysterious creature with a tail in the alleyway. We know what werewolves look like, and that's no werewolf. Allison's parents have taken helicopter parenting to a whole new level and have kidnapped and tortured the high school principal in order to get Grandpa Gerard a position at the high school. At said school, Scott smells another werewolf in the locker room, fully confirming that Isaac has been bitten by Derek. Right before Isaac loses control on the lacrosse field, Sheriff Stilinski shows up to tell him that his dad died the night before. Isaac gets taken to holding at the sheriff's station because he was the last one to see his father alive, and Jackson testified that they had a huge argument. Of course, Isaac is a newly turned werewolf, so Derek requests Scott's help to break him out before he loses control and kills someone. Allison learns that a hunter is going to sneak into the sheriff's station with a syringe of wolfsbane to kill Isaac in disguise, and manages to slow the hunter down by shooting him in the leg with an arrow. When Derek and Stiles show up to break him out, Stiles recognizes someone limping and realizes it's the hunter. Stiles is attacked, but Isaac has shifted and broken out of his cell, so he takes the hunter down. Before he can go after Stiles too, Derek intervenes and asserts his dominance as the alpha. Allison and Scott, meanwhile, are at Isaac's house investigating and learn about the abuse that Isaac faced from his father. While Scott is locked inside the freezer for the full moon, Allison is attacked by the creature that killed Mr. Leahy, and we get a quick look at its face. It's basically a lizard, and it has a tail and can walk on the ceiling. Meanwhile, Jackson has been recording himself on a video camera for the full moon, and when he wakes up he finds nothing but footage of himself sleeping. This is a pretty good episode too, with the real horror elements with Allison and Scott at Isaac's house especially. Also, the lizard monster is genuinely terrifying. To get it out of the way early, we're going to take a moment to talk about Isaac's dad. I've seen some people call the addition of having Isaac be from an abusive household to be unnecessary. While I personally don't think so, I can understand that some people don't see abuse in media to be something that should ever be portrayed, but I think that Teen Wolf does a pretty tolerable job of handling the issue. It never plays Isaac out to be a victim that somehow deserved what was coming to him, and they do a mostly okay job of not depicting any of the abuse. We get the one scene at the beginning of this episode, but we never have to see him in any other situations because his dad dies pretty soon after, and we don't really get anything in flashbacks. I also think that the show manages to do something correctly later on too, and that doesn't just forget that Isaac has this trauma. For the rest of the season and for parts of Season 3, Isaac refers to his past and we get character moments that are directly affected by his abusive upbringing. It's not the most poignant or nuanced take, no, but it's quite a bit better than some other shows. I won't name names. It's also a little better than the way some of the other new characters are treated, but we'll get there in a second. Episode 3 starts with Allison getting kidnapped at a gas station, but it turns out it's okay because it was actually her dad. This is the start of her hunter training. When she gets out, the hunter that helped her dad kidnap her tries to encourage her. Apparently, she did better than he did. After she leaves, the hunter is killed by the lizard monster. At school, it's climbing day in gym class. I don't know a single high school that any of my friends have been to that had a climbing day, but anyways. Allison and Scott climb the wall together, and then Stiles goes to climb the wall with a new character named Erica, played by Gage Golightly. Erica gets scared when she's up on the wall, so she gets lowered before she finishes. Later, she returns to the gym that is apparently left unlocked and unsupervised and goes to climb one more time without a harness. Because she's epileptic and this is a TV show, she has a seizure while climbing, but thankfully Scott shows up to catch her. In the locker room, Jackson overhears Scott and Stiles talking about how Isaac is a werewolf, and he gets understandably angry that Derek bit someone else, and it worked while it didn't work for him. At the hospital, Erica gets to meet Derek, and after some very uncomfortable flirting, he gets Erica to join his pack. In class, Matt is upset that the camera he loaned to Jackson is broken now, but Jackson overhears some information about immunity from the lesson. Knowing that nothing happened to Lydia either after her bite, he assumes that she is immune and unknowingly immunized him as well. Lydia gets upset and then starts to have another hallucination. It seems that the bite from Peter, while not turning her into a werewolf, has had some other effect. Stiles makes a deal with another new character named Boyd, played by Sinqua Walls. He negotiates for keys to an ice rink since Scott and Allison want somewhere to have one of their secret dates, and Stiles wants to get Lydia's mind off her trauma. While they're talking, Erica shows up at the cafeteria with the new confidence and apparently no more epilepsy. Now, when they follow, she gets into Derek's car. If we're counting, that's 2 for Derek's pack, but still no Scott. Mr. Argent is concerned about Lydia since she was bitten, and he tasks Allison to keep an eye on her as her first hunter job. They all arrive at the ice rink, and they have a pretty good time. Scott and Allison get a good date out of it, and Stiles gets to attempt to woo Lydia. Before any real progress is made, Lydia has another hallucination. Later, Scott tries to figure out who Derek plans to bite next. It's not really clear why Scott hates Derek so much here, but I'm assuming it's because Derek lied to him about there being a cure, and that Derek biting teenagers is causing problems for him with the Argents. Mrs. Argent deliberately injures herself so she can go to the hospital and chat with Scott's mom. While she's there, she learns that Scott does not seem very heartbroken and starts to get suspicious about Scott and Allison's supposedly finished relationship. Scott later realizes that Boyd is Derek's next target, but Stiles argues that maybe being turned into a werewolf won't be so bad for them. It seems to have been pretty good for Erica. Scott says he feels responsible if anything happens to them because Derek didn't warn them properly about the hunters. Jackson visits Derek because he wants to know why the bite didn't work, but he runs into the Argents and the hunters instead. I guess he didn't get the memo that Derek moved into a train car. Stiles goes to Boyd's house to stop him from getting the bite, but Erica shows up and knocks him out with a piece of his Jeep. Scott has better luck and finds Boyd at the ice rink, but it's too late and he's already accepted the bite. He also runs into Derek, Isaac, and Erica, and he easily dispatches both Isaac and Erica. Derek managed to beat Scott, and we get a pretty solid idea of each wolf's strength level and their hierarchy. Scott's injury does not heal quickly, and Dr. Deaton tells him it's because the wounds are from an alpha. It seems the vet is finally willing to talk about the whole werewolf thing. This is another pretty solid episode, and in my opinion, it's one of the best in the season so far. The new werewolves are all great, and while some of them get more plot and characterization than others, all 3 of them are great additions to the cast. I also have to point out, since Derek is my favorite character, that I sort of hate this side of him. It's nice to see him smiling and maybe happy for once, but I don't like how he generally seems to be taking advantage of those teenagers, and I definitely don't like the creepy undertones with whatever he has going on with Erica. Also, I miss his blue eyes. Episode 4 starts off with Scott getting some more information from Dr. Deaton. Apparently, the hunters have a bestiary that has information on all the supernatural creatures they have encountered. Fun fact, if you own one of the original run of the Season 4 DVDs, it actually includes a copy of a bestiary with some of the creatures found in the show. That's a fun extra. The hunters show up at the animal clinic and have questions about the creature that is killing people. It seems it starts by making a small cut on the neck that paralyzes with some sort of venom, and then kills its victims after. Add that to the list of reasons this lizard thing is creepy. Deaton also says that usually creatures that paralyze do it as a way to eat their prey, but since this creature isn't eating anyone, then killing may be its only purpose. After Erica tore out a part of Stiles' Jeep last episode, he takes it to the shop to get repaired. After being quoted a ridiculously high price, he touches some strange goop and ends up paralyzed on the ground. Turns out the goop doesn't even need to go in through a cut. While paralyzed, Stiles watches helplessly as the mechanic is killed by the lizard. While talking to Allison, Grandpa Gerard drops what looks like a small leather book. We learn that he has to take multiple pills multiple times a day. And later we find out that this little book is just a recipe book. Gerard sort of takes the role of main hunter for Season 2, and we're finally starting to get a little more information about him. At Derek's new train shed, he spends time with the new betas and tries to train them. They all do a pretty bad job, especially Erica, who tries to kiss Derek, but Derek just continues to throw them on the ground. Lydia attends her first counseling session at the school and runs into a cute guy in the waiting room. Recently separated from Jackson, she flirts a little before her appointment. She meets the guidance counselor, Mrs. Morel, who is apparently also the French teacher. The session does not go well, and Lydia seems resistant to counseling. Jackson goes to Danny to recover the information on the memory card from the other night when he failed to record himself turning into a werewolf. He shows up with Matt and learns that a few hours of the footage appear to have been deleted, which means that the hours he may have actually been shifted weren't even recorded. Meanwhile, Scott, Stiles, and Allison track down the bestiary and realize it might be in Gerard's office at the school. Stiles leaves the lacrosse game to find it. While in the school, Stiles runs into Erica and Derek, but also the lizard monster. Erica is quickly knocked out, and Stiles and Derek end up in the pool with Derek paralyzed and Stiles holding him up. While in the water, they realize that the lizard monster is afraid of water and won't get close to them when they're in the pool. After the game, Scott goes back to Allison's house under Gerard's invitation and learns that Allison's parents have kept his werewolf identity a secret from Gerard. Stiles manages to call Scott from the pool after dropping Derek in the deep end, but Scott hangs up on him because he's at the Argent's house. Scott and Allison realize that the bestiary must be digital and is definitely in Gerard's office at the school, so Scott rushes over just in time to save Stiles and Derek from drowning. Scott also manages to scare off the lizard with a piece of the mirror, since it's shocked by its own reflection. They retrieve the bestiary, but it's in a language they don't understand. Before they can dig up more info, Derek walks out with Erica and tells them that the lizard monster is a kanama, and that it's a shapeshifter similar to a werewolf, but it doesn't know who or what it is. Scott shows up at the hospital to pick up his mom and runs into Gerard, who stabs him in the stomach and reveals he actually does know about Scott's werewolf identity, and then he threatens to kill Scott's mom if he doesn't do him a favor. I would argue that this is the best episode of the season, and it's not just because of the hysteric moment in the pool. The cliffhanger ending was absolutely brutal back when it first aired, since there was an entire week before the next episode, and it's great to get a bit more information on our big bad creature for the season. We still don't know who it is or what it's doing, but at least we know what it's called and some of the things that keep it in check. We also get a bit of a look at what's going on with Lydia and Jackson, and it's clear that neither one of them are doing very well dealing with the events of the first season. I know I wouldn't be. In the next episode, Jackson gets picked up by Derek's betas and taken into the new lair, where he gets tested with some of the remaining kanama goop. According to Derek, the kanama won't be able to paralyze itself with its own venom. Jackson gets paralyzed, so they cross him off as a suspect. While he's paralyzed, he agrees to retract his testimony regarding Isaac, so Isaac can return to school. At school, Jackson tells Scott and Stiles about what happened to him, and they realize that if Lydia fails the test, then they're going to kill her. In chemistry class, the betas attempt to test Lydia while Scott, Stiles, and Allison try to stop them. They fail, and Lydia ends up eating some rock candy with the kanama venom on it, and it seems to have no effect. Therefore, she fails Derek's test. Jackson meets Danny with Matt, and they try to figure out who could have removed the footage during the full moon. Jackson realizes it could have been Lydia, since she still has a key to his house. Allison runs into Mrs. Morel and asks her to translate the kanama pages from the bestiary. She learns that the kanama seeks a friend, and its powers are strongest at the full moon, like a werewolf. Scott confronts Derek about his plan to kill Lydia, and he tries to argue that Lydia is immune. Derek says that's not possible, but Scott brings up a good point in that Jackson doesn't really seem to be turning either. So Scott jumps onto Jackson's theory that Lydia is immune and has passed it on to him. Scott, Allison, and Jackson try to keep Lydia away from Derek and his betas, so they bring her to Scott's house and lock her inside. But before leaving the school, Scott runs into Matt, who is starting to get suspicious about all the lens flares in the pictures of Scott. He also finds out that someone has torn up Danny's lacrosse gear. In Scott's room, Jackson accuses Lydia of using her key to break into his house and alter the footage. She admits to having a key, but doesn't want to give it back. They kiss in what seems like a final goodbye, and we see lizard scales along Jackson's back. At the same time, we get confirmation via the video that Danny and Matt are recovering that Jackson did actually change on the full moon, but it wasn't into a werewolf. Derek's pack break into Scott's house, and Allison uses kanama venom to incapacitate Erica. Scott arrives and tosses both Erica and Isaac out of the house and back at Derek. The kanama then rushes out of the house, and we get our final confirmation that it is Jackson and not Lydia when she comes running out of the house with a million questions. Good thing they didn't let Derek kill her. This is another really good episode, and we get our confirmation about who the kanama is. It's pretty early in the season to get confirmation on our whodunit, but we still don't really know who the friend is that the kanama is seeking, and we still don't know why it's going after people or what its end goal is. We do get a look at this so-called friend at the end of the episode, but they're wearing gloves, so they could literally be anyone. I'd make a bet, but I already know, so. In episode 6, Danny finishes restoring Jackson's video and then texts Jackson. He says he didn't even watch it, which is good because it's absolutely terrifying. Elsewhere, Derek fights with the kanama and doesn't seem to get very far. Chris Argent shows up and shoots it, and it doesn't seem to work either. Basically, this thing is indestructible. However, it walks over to Gerard and just leaves him alone. Scott follows the kanama to a nightclub, which turns out to be where Danny was going, which means that Danny might be the next target. Scott and Stiles go into the club to protect him, which turns out to be a gay club. We see Danny's boyfriend from the first season, now his ex, and immediately we root for him to find a new man. The club is too crowded for Stiles or Scott to get to Danny, but Derek shows up and quickly the people in the club start dropping to the floor. Derek manages to slash the kanama's throat, but not before it paralyzes a ton of people, including Danny. Danny's only concern? That his ex got paralyzed too. What a king. Scott and Stiles follow his blood trail and find Jackson unconscious, so they load him into Stiles' Jeep just in time for Stiles' dad to show up. They lie to his dad by saying they came to support Danny, and he buys it, for now. Lydia lets her dog out at night and runs into the boy from the waiting room at the counselor's office. He gives her a flower and says that she should keep it with her. Later, Jackson wakes up at the back of the police van, which Stiles and Scott have stolen in order to keep Jackson away from people. Jackson demands to be let go, but they say it's for his own good. Stiles tells Jackson about all the things he's been doing as the Kanama, but Jackson does not believe him. Scott and Allison meet up in the woods at night, and while they talk about Jackson, he overhears them saying that nobody loves him. Ouch. He breaks free while Scott and Allison are distracted, and Stiles shows up when they all realize their attempts to keep his parents in the dark have failed miserably. Scott, Stiles, and Allison all agree that they need to tell their parents about what's going on, but before they get the chance, Scott and Stiles show up at the police station and Jackson is there. Looks like he's turned them in for kidnapping him with a police van. Allison also learns that Mrs. Morell's translation of the bestiary was wrong. The Kanama doesn't want a friend, but it wants a master. We get some more good info in this episode and a bunch more of the subplot between Allison and her mother. I also think that Jackson is a really interesting character, which I'll go more into after all the episodes are recapped, but we get a good look at his family life in this episode. As much as he's an absolute jerk most of the time, he's much more fleshed out in this season than he ever was in the first one. And you can't help but feel a little bad that he has this mindless killing lizard that he doesn't even know about it. It's not as rough as Derek or Isaac have had it, but it's pretty rough. In episode 7, we open to a couple arguing in their trailer. The woman is pregnant and she's upset that she and her husband are poor. Before the argument can really get going, the husband is killed by the Kanama and its master, who showed up this time in person to work alongside Lizard Jackson. While the Kanama kills the husband, it sees that the wife is pregnant and leaves her alone. At the sheriff's station, Stiles and Scott found out that Jackson has placed a restraining order on them, and their illegal acts are reflecting poorly on Stiles' dad's position as the sheriff. At school, the gang uses Lydia's translation of the bestiary, but can't fully understand what it means. It says it's a weapon of vengeance, but they can't identify anything in Jackson's past that would mean becoming a serial killer. While Melissa is cleaning Scott's room, she finds a pack of condoms, so she speaks to Allison's mother at the school. This, of course, is the absolute worst thing she could have done, because now Mrs. Argent knows for sure that Scott and Allison are not broken up. Jackson nearly assaults Allison in the locker room, but he comes to his senses when Scott shows up and defends her. Stiles, Erica, and Matt also show up, and they're all there when Mr. Harris arrives to give them detention. Lydia talks to her new man, and he says he wants to show her something later. He tells her to bring the flower he gave her in the previous episode. At detention, Scott, Stiles, Allison, Jackson, Erica, and Matt go to the library. Scott and Stiles learn from Erica that Jackson's parents died in a car accident and that Jackson was born after his mother died, which is like the roughest way that information could have been shared. They think that because of the way Jackson's parents died, it may have been murder, and that might be why Jackson has Kanama issues. Scott goes to confront Jackson, but finds Matt paralyzed on the ground. Erica also gets cut, and it seems to both paralyze her and deactivate her werewolf abilities, so her epilepsy returns. This really sucks, since other than the confidence, that was like the only thing she was really getting out of this whole werewolf thing. And now that isn't even working. Allison and Stiles want to take her to the hospital, but Scott says they should go to Derek since he knows more about the supernatural. Lydia tries to find the flower, but she can't find it before she heads out to the back of her house and into the woods. She comes across a really nice house, which she assumes belongs to the boy she's been talking to, but when she goes inside, it's mostly deserted. Her new man is there and they kiss, but as they do, everything transforms and it turns out that the boy was actually just Peter as a teenager. Plus, the house she was in is actually the skeleton of the Hale house out in the woods, where Peter was buried under the floorboards. He says there's one more thing she needs to do for him before he disappears and leaves her with a purple wolfsbane flower. At Derek's train warehouse, he breaks Erica's arm in order to kickstart the healing process. While they're there, Scott agrees to join Derek's pack long enough to stop Jackson. At the hospital, the woman from the intro of the episode is smothered by the Kanama's master, since it was unable or unwilling to kill her. This is another really excellent episode, and I'd like to draw special attention to this one shot of Lydia, since I think she looks absolutely incredible here. One of my friends is a huge Lydia fan, and she specifically cites this as her favorite look. This episode does contain a bunch of discussion about Jackson's adoption, and this is where I'll bring up that I'm not a huge fan of the way that Jackson's adoption is handled in the show. I think it's important to note that adoption is a perfectly legitimate mean of parentage, and being adopted does not mean that a character automatically has issues. I think that the characters and the show as an extension just sort of go with the idea that Jackson is adopted and therefore is completely lost in his identity, and I don't think that's the take we need to have anymore with adopted characters. Jackson is clearly well provided for by his parents, and I personally just don't like when shows try to pass off adoption as some kind of illegitimate parent and child relationship. Thankfully, they take a much more nuanced approach to adoption in future seasons, so at least there's progress. In episode 8, we learn that there is an upcoming secret rave that all the high school students are somehow trying to attend, including Matt and Jackson. Scott is also lurking since he's following Jackson and finds out that the tickets are way too expensive for him. Jackson, however, seems more focused on the woman selling the tickets, who may be his next victim. Stiles sits down with his dad like they did in the first season and discuss the murder cases a bit. They realize that so far, all of the victims, aside from Isaac's dad, are connected to the 2006 high school yearbook, and they were all in Mr. Harris's chemistry class. Plus, Isaac's older brother Camden is also from the same class, though he was killed in combat years before the show. This is a sort of important detail for a fan theory in season 3 and 4, so I'm bringing it up now. We'll put a giant pin in that and we'll come back to it way later. At the animal clinic, Scott, Isaac, and Derek talk to Deaton about the Kanima. Isaac solidifies himself as Derek's #1 beta by tagging along for the field trip. They come up with a plan to stop the Kanima, since they can use the mountain ash trick to make it a barrier that it can't cross. And since the Kanima and its master are linked, the master won't be able to cross either. This time, the mountain ash won't just be wood, but rather literal ash that someone will have to spread in a big loop around the concert venue. This is ultimately left up to Stiles, since he's the only one in the group that can handle the mountain ash since he's not a werewolf. We'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of the episode, but this one moment is single-handedly responsible for spawning like half of Teen Wolf fanfiction. Scott and Allison talk about their failing relationship, and they decide it's probably best if they're seen with other people. To clarify, they're still together, but they're going to try fake dating other people to trick their parents. Allison ends up agreeing to go to the rave with Matt as a result, but Mrs. Argent sees her kissing Scott in the classroom and is less than happy. At the rave, Scott sees Allison with Matt and is upset because he didn't want her getting hurt during their plan. Using the syringe they got from Deaton, they are able to drug Jackson long enough to detain him in a separate room, but he easily breaks free and gets loose into the rave. Still, Stiles is able to block the place off with a ring of mountain ash. Fun fact, the series creator Jeff Davis actually shows up at the rave. This is him here. Outside the venue, Derek and Boyd are shot at by hunters, and they realize the bullets are laced with wolfsbane. The hunters are definitely not trying to take Jackson alive. At the concert, Matt kisses Allison, but she doesn't reciprocate. She still thinks he's kind of creepy, which he definitely is. Also outside the venue, Scott is run over by a car, which belongs to Mrs. Argent. She drags him off and starts to murder him using a vaporizer. It turns out she's sick of him running around behind her back with Allison and has decided to take matters into her own hands. Scott howls for help, which Derek hears. He demands Stiles break the barrier, so he does in order to save Scott, though this lets Jackson and the Kanima's master free at the same time. Derek rushes to help Scott and in the process ends up biting Mrs. Argent. Thankfully, he and Scott both get away unharmed. In the meantime, Jackson has gone full lizard and killed the DJ from earlier. After the show, the sheriff arrives and is unable to place her as one of Mr. Harris's students. It looks like that lead kind of went nowhere. This is a solid episode, but I have a minor beef with the conversation Dr. Deaton has with Stiles and its effect on the fandom. In this conversation, Deaton says that Mountain Ash just needs a spark to work, and that he has to believe or it won't do anything. Because of this, I'd say about half of all Teen Wolf fanfiction includes Stiles as some sort of magic user. Magic itself in Teen Wolf is never really made clear, like if it's something you're born with or if any human would be able to do it, but that doesn't really matter. It was always a popular fan concept to give Stiles magic, since it's sort of human adjacent. But once this episode aired, everything sort of shifted gears, and people started referring to him as a type of magic user called a spark, rather than just a person who uses a spark of belief to make the mountain ash work. We see lots of other characters in the future who use the mountain ash that never get this treatment, including Scott's mom. So it's definitely a case of just giving Stiles the main character status in a fanfiction, which of course we already discussed last episode as being something that happens all the time. I don't hate the idea of some fanworks including this, quite the opposite actually. I tend to love fanworks that give Stiles magic, but if you look at the canon aspects of the show, I really don't think you can conclude in good faith that Stiles is an all-powerful magical being that was sidelined just because his friend is the main character. Just no. I will say though that calling a magic user a spark is like objectively a much cooler name than just saying magic user or like mage or whatever, so I don't hate that either. We also learn at the end of the episode that Mrs. Morel, the counselor / French teacher from the high school, is in the know about werewolves and is also chummy with Dr. Deaton. Some people shipped them together during this season, but we don't know this yet. They're actually siblings, so they will not be appearing on the ship outlook at the end of this video. In episode 9, we finally get to the bottom of what Lydia is doing, and she hosts a huge party at her house. She has a hallucination conversation with Peter, who implies that if she doesn't do as he plans, then everyone will die. Scott and Derek talk about how they need to kill Jackson since it's clear they can't save him, and since Derek bid him, he feels responsible and says he'll do it. It sort of echoes the point that Scott made in an earlier episode, that he feels responsible if something happens to Isaac, Erica, or Boyd, because Derek didn't warn them properly. Similarly, Mr. and Mrs. Argent are stuck with a dilemma. It's part of the hunter code that a hunter end their own life before they turn if they're bitten by a werewolf, and so Allison's mom has been preparing for her own death. I genuinely think this is one of the saddest moments we ever get in the series, and I don't even like her that much. Derek prepares the betas for the full moon, and since he hasn't really had time to train them very well, he has to chain them up. Erica gets extra chains because she's a woman and therefore used to the pain. Alright? When the moon comes up, it doesn't hold them, and Derek has to fight them back. But Isaac is the only one who is able to control himself, and he says his anchor is the memory of his father before he was abusive. I sort of hate this, but I like that Isaac has control, so I'll take it, I guess. Allison's mom tries to talk to her before Lydia's party, but Allison says she's busy and that they'll talk later. Mrs. Argent lets her go, even though she understands they won't get that chance to talk later. Meanwhile, I'm screaming at the TV, trying to get them to just talk. Stiles and his dad realize while the victims haven't been connected through Mr. Harris's class, they have been connected by the swim team, including Isaac's dad since he was the coach. Therefore, all of the victims are connected to the 2006 swim team. At the party, everyone shows up and Lydia encourages them to try the punch. As the full moon appears, all of our main characters start to experience serious hallucinations. Scott pictures Allison making out with Lizard Jackson. Jackson pictures his birth parents showing up at the party. Allison sees a clone of herself shoot her in the stomach with an arrow, and Stiles sees his father drunkenly blaming him for the death of his mother. It's all really heavy stuff. At the party, we also meet our first fan cameo in a character named Danielle. She is actually played by a fan who won a contest in order to make an appearance on the show. She appears a few times in future seasons too, and from what I've heard, she was a joy to have on set. Allison's mom goes through with her death just as the full moon comes out. Call me crazy, but I think this is up there as one of the saddest deaths in the entire series. She really eats this scene up. Allison shows up at the hospital, obviously distraught by the very sudden death of her mother. At first, she assumes it's part of her hunter training, but she learns quickly that it isn't. She also eats this scene up. It is genuinely kind of hard to watch. Back at the party, Scott and Stiles overhear someone yelling that they can't swim and realize they might be the Kanema's master, and that might be why the Kanema is afraid of water. We see that it's Matt, and later we get confirmation that he's the one controlling Jackson. By extension, he must be the one who edited the recording that Jackson took, and was the one who went after Danny and the other victims. Lydia has dipped out of her own party and gone to Derek's train lair and blown Wolfsbane in his face. She then somehow drags his unconscious body all the way from the train warehouse to the Hale house, where she uses him to resurrect Peter from the dead. It is literally never explained how this works, but presumably since he was very recently killed and this is what he called the worm moon, she's able to resurrect him using the alpha power of the werewolf that killed him. That's pretty much all the explanation I can give because that's all we'll ever get. No one in this series is ever resurrected in this way ever again, so we'll just move on. The reveal that Matt is the Kanema's master is interesting. There's been moments throughout the season where Matt has become more in the know about the supernatural, and now we get more information on why. I never particularly liked Matt, but I don't really hate him either. He's pretty mid-tier as far as Teen Wolf villain goes, and it's a shame that he's in this season since the other two bad guys are just so much bigger in scope. Episode 10 starts off with a flashback recap of how Matt found out about the whole Kanema thing. When he gave Jackson the camera, he waited outside his house because he assumed he would be filming a sex tape with Allison. See, Matt has this huge crush on Allison, which has been super creepy about all season. When he saw on the remote feed that Jackson was turning into a lizard, and then the lizard came by the door of his car, he was able to start a connection with the Kanema. Stiles and Scott try to tell Sheriff Stilinski that Matt is the killer, but when they go to the station, they find many of the deputies dead. Turns out Matt and Lizard Jackson have killed most of the deputies. Matt uses a gun to force the sheriff to handcuff himself in a back room, and then gets Scott and Stiles to shred all the evidence of his involvement in the murders. Derek arrives, still a little weak from his run-in with Lydia and Zombie Peter, and is immediately paralyzed by Jackson. Stiles is also paralyzed, and it seems that Matt is a Steric shipper. Scott's mom arrives at the station, and just after she enters, Matt shoots Scott in the stomach. Melissa, unaware that Scott can just heal, justifiably freaks out at this. Then we learn that Matt wants to know about what the bestiary says because his skin is starting to get scaly. Looks like he's turning into a Kanema himself. Allison gets a text to bring the bestiary to the police station, but she's already in the process of setting up an attack on the precinct with the rest of the hunters. Gerard puts Allison in charge, and she's officially in hunter mode now that her mom has died. She's under the impression that Derek just straight up killed her mom deliberately, so she's out for blood. Derek and Stiles chat while paralyzed, and Derek says that since Matt broke the rules of the supernatural, he's paying the price. Reminder, he's been using Jackson to kill people, but the Kanema has rules about being used as a weapon of vengeance, and since Matt killed one of the victims himself, he broke the rules. Matt monologues about his reasons for murder. Back when he was a kid, he was at Isaac's house during a pool party that the swim team was throwing. He got tossed in and drowned while the rest of them had fun and ignored him. Mr. Leahy eventually pulled him out of the water, but he considers it as a moment where he died. Then, when he connected with Jackson that night and Mr. Leahy died, he realized he could use Jackson as a weapon to get back at all the people who let him drown. The word drown is doing a lot of heavy lifting here since he didn't actually die, but he seems to think he did. As he finishes his explanation, the hunters attack the police station. Allison runs into Scott and demands to fight Derek, but Scott is confused and doesn't know about her mom's death. Melissa begs to see Scott so she can help him with his literal gunshot wound, but Derek and the Kanema roll into the place and fight. Scott shows up and Melissa gets to see her son in all his wolfy glory. In the hallway, we learn that Scott and Gerard's plan is not turning out as expected. Remember, like 5 episodes ago, Gerard stabbed Scott and started blackmailing him into working together. Derek overhears this and realizes they've been secretly working behind his back. Trust is just completely gone at this point. At the very end of the episode, Matt manages to escape the police station, but is ultimately drowned by Gerard, who takes over as the Kanema's master. There's a lot that happens in this episode, but most importantly to the series, we watch Scott and Allison's relationship sort of fall apart. There's a bit of a hint in the episodes leading up to this, but from this point on, it's basically toast. Plus, Scott's mom finally knows Scott's a werewolf, and that doesn't seem to be going very well either. It's a pretty good episode, and it has a lot of little fun moments on top of all the heavy stuff. Gerard's ascension into true baddie for the season really makes it for me, since it's that point in the structure where the two villains come together. The tensions from season 1 is really escalated here, and we have the highest body count in the series so far, pretty much all in one episode. The next episode starts back up a few days later, and we learn that Scott and his mom haven't really talked since she found out about his werewolf side. We also find out from a counseling session with Stiles that Isaac, Erica, and Boyd are all disappeared and have been labeled as runaways. It seems the Mega Hunter versus Werewolf battle at the police station did not inspire them with confidence. Scott is greeted by Gerard choking his mom via lizard tail and threatening him to help him kill Derek and his pack. When he leaves, his mom makes him promise he will not help the psychopathic geriatric man. Erica and Boyd show up at Derek's and tell him they're leaving for real. They've heard wolves in the woods and they think there's another pack. Derek says otherwise, but they'd rather take their chances. Isaac, meanwhile, goes to the animal clinic and learns some of the upsides of being a werewolf. He helps Scott suck the pain out of a sick dog, which is a new ability that Teen Wolf werewolves have. As someone who has been abused, this makes Isaac very happy. Isaac tells Scott about Erica and Boyd planning to leave, and Isaac places his trust with Scott rather than with Derek. He's still in Derek's pack, don't get it twisted, but he's working with Scott now. Stiles gets to play in an actual lacrosse game, which is great because his dad is in the stands. It's also not great because Gerard speaks to Scott and tells him that if he doesn't turn Derek into him, then he's going to have Jackson kill someone on the field. As the game goes on, Jackson injures more and more players until eventually Isaac is injured and left in the locker room with Gerard. Scott goes to help him, leaving Stiles practically alone on the field. Somehow he finds the skill within himself to score a bunch of times, winning them the game. As the game ends, the lights go out and it appears that Jackson kills himself on the field in front of everyone. In the chaos, Sheriff Stilinski realizes that Stiles has also gone missing. In a lengthy argument/conversation with Peter, Derek learns he may be able to turn Jackson back into a werewolf if he's able to remind Jackson of his identity. Peter implies that Lydia is the only one capable of this, since he has very little love for his own family. In the woods, Allison and her dad hunt Erica and Boyd with an excessive amount of arrows. She takes them both down and is about to kill them when Mr. Argent intervenes. This is a great episode and a greater lead up to the finale of the season. It's not clear what Gerard's real plan is yet, but he's still such a good bad guy and he seems to be one step ahead of Scott at every given moment. Apparently an unpopular opinion, but I also like the new personality that Allison has been adopting in the last few episodes. It's completely over the top and 180 compared to her previous behavior, but I don't think it's unreasonable to think that someone who's gone through what she's gone through would behave this way. Thankfully, she has good friends and a good father to try to steer her in the right direction, and she's not so far gone as to hurt the people people closest to her, like her dad or Scott. This is usually around the point where people start to really hate Allison, and I think that's mostly because the show wants you to side with the werewolves on account of practically all the main good guys being werewolves. So when you have a character that's against them, you naturally want to be against that character. It's why I think other ones like Chris Argent also take a little bit of getting used to for the first few seasons before you really come around to them. And why, when characters like Isaac or Erica act nasty at the beginning of the season, you root for them so easily by the end. In the final episode of the season, Jackson has been put in a body bag and is being taken to the morgue. Scott's mom goes with him and soon finds out that Jackson is not dead, but is just creating some kind of cocoon of Canema venom. Stiles, meanwhile, is taken to the Argent basement and sees Erica and Boyd tied up and getting electrocuted. While he's there, he's beaten by Gerard as a message for Scott and the rest of the werewolves. Scott and Isaac attempt to track Stiles, but before they can, they run into Derek and Peter. They share that they think they know how to stop Jackson. Mr. Argent sees Allison talking to Gerard and realizes that he's poisoning her mind. He tries to make her see some sense, but she's too focused on getting revenge on Derek to care that she might be hurting her friend. Stiles shows up at his house and runs into his dad, who is furious about his injuries, but otherwise very relieved he's home. He lies to his dad and says he was beaten up by the losing lacrosse team. Lydia arrives at the house and says that they won't let her see Jackson at the hospital, and reveals that she still has his house key. She wants to go help him, but Stiles doesn't want her to get hurt. Of course, they go anyway. Mr. Argent chooses a side and lowers the electric current that is keeping Boyd and Erica locked up, allowing them to break free. He then goes off after Allison and Gerard. Scott and Isaac show up at the hospital to get help with the cocooned Jackson, but before they can get him out, Derek shows back up intending to kill him. He still feels responsible for Jackson being a Canema in the first place, and wants to stop it before anything else happens. They unzip the bag, and Jackson is lying there as a Canema. When they try to kill him, Gerard shows up and agrees that he's too dangerous to live. He uses Jackson to attack Derek, but we don't have to add anything to the Derek dies counter quite yet. They all fight the Canema, but it's futile and it beats them all pretty easily. It doesn't hurt that Allison has stepped in to help and attacks Isaac, but the lizard Jackson stops her before she can kill Derek. Finally, we get the big reveal of what Gerard's plan is. It turns out those pills he's been taking are for cancer, and he's decided to take the bite in order to cure it completely. He grabs Derek's head and forces Derek to give him the bite. This is twice as awful when you remember that Gerard is the one who insisted Allison's mother end her life when she was bitten, and he intended all along to do the same thing, without ending his own life. It seems to work fine at first, but then he starts to leak the same black blood that Jackson did in the first few episodes. His body is rejecting the bite, and it's revealed that Scott replaced his medication with pills full of mountain ash. When Gerard and the audience thought he was one step ahead, Scott was actually 2 steps ahead the whole time. Gerard lies there in his own goo and tells Jackson to kill everyone. Before he can, Jackson is run over by Stiles' Jeep. Lydia runs out and confronts him, showing him the key she still has. The key is able to finally trigger Jackson's memories, and he turns back into his half-shifted Canema form. Seeing their chance, Derek and Peter both jump in to kill Jackson, stabbing him in the back and the front. Jackson dies, and Lydia lies with his body. Free from the distraction, they also realize that Gerard has disappeared. It seems even bleeding black goo doesn't quite kill him. It also turns out that being stabbed doesn't quite kill Jackson either, and he gets back up, this time as a werewolf. And his eyes are blue. That's funny. Allison apologizes to Scott, but officially breaks up with him. They end off on semi-good terms, but definitely not together. Erica and Boyd are still on the run, and the wolf pack that they heard howling is confirmed to be real when they run into a small group of werewolves in the woods. Around the same time, Isaac learns that Derek was building a pack this whole time, because a group of alpha werewolves are on their way to town. This is the setup for the first half of Season 3, and I really am excited to jump into that one. If we look at the second season as a whole, I think it really is up there as one of the best seasons. If I add it to my complete season ranking, I'd probably put it in second place. This might be high for some people, but I still really like how simple it is relative to the later seasons, and I think the Canema mythology builds really well off the werewolf mythology from the first season. We still haven't hit the point where they add multiple creatures per season yet, so it's easy to follow as they explain everything new as they add it in. I also think that Gerard and the Canema are excellent villains, and Matt is a decent one in his own right. I mentioned in the first season video that Teen Wolf tends to have a certain setup when it comes to the villains, and this season follows a similar structure. We have our supernatural villain in the Canema with Matt, and our human villain with Gerard. They're separate, though connected, since Jackson is the Canema due to Derek's bite, and Gerard only comes to town due to Kate's death in the Season 1 finale. Then, Towards the end of the season, the two threats come together when Gerard takes control of the Kanama by killing Matt. It works really well, so even though we find out the identity of the Kanama only 5 episodes in, we still have a lot of mystery to follow for the rest of the season. If we take a look at those things I'm keeping track of, we have an absolutely impressive Derek dies counter of 0 for this season, which leaves us at a total of 2 for the series so far. Hold your horses for season 3 though, because it will be rough for him. Looking at our core 6 cast members, they are all alive by the end of the season. Of the 6, only Jackson will not return in later seasons, so I'll mark him with that white X for now. I know technically he does show up for a cameo, but he doesn't really have a plot, so I'm considering him gone, just like how I marked Peter dead in the last video. As usual, they get the yellow bar to mark they're alive. We also get to add characters like Isaac and Erica and Boyd here, and they're all alive as well, so they get yellow too. Most of our parents at this point are also alive, with Allison's mom being the big change here. She does appear in flashbacks and such moving forwards, so no X for her though. We can also add Jackson's birth parents as dead, even though we only hear about them in passing. As for side characters, still no deaths from our non-core characters, so ones like Danny here are safe. As for villains, only Matt is confirmed to be dead for now, so we'll leave Gerard as yellow here. Honorable mentions to some minor characters like Danielle from the party, Danny's ex, and Mrs. Whitmore, who is trying her absolute hardest here to be a real character and is being given absolutely nothing to work with. We have more deaths in this season than in the first season, and they're mostly all by the Kanama, so we have a nice clean row of red here too. We're going to start seeing a real uptick in the number of deaths moving forward, so let's enjoy this while we can. Like last time, I want to talk a little about a few notable characters on their own before I jump into some of the ships from this season. I don't have much to say about Scott this time, since it's mostly the same as the first video, but I still think Scott gets unnecessary hate here. A lot of people think his actions throughout the season are unforgivable, and that he backstabbed Derek by working alongside Gerard. Sure, he definitely did not do a nice thing by keeping his involvement with Gerard secret, but the Derek we see in this season would not have been open to hearing Scott was working with the enemy, even if he planned to double-cross him in the end anyway. Still, Scott is hardly the worst character, and I'm tired of people acting like he's the spawn of Satan just because he likes a girl. Like I said last time, it's not his fault, he's a teenager, and Styles is more interesting. Speaking of Styles, he gets quite a bit more to do this season that doesn't solely revolve around helping Scott. There are even parts where he isn't speaking to Scott, and of course there's the notable moment when he helps Derek in the pool, or when he makes the mountain ash. In the first season, you could tell the show knew what Styles would be a fan favorite, but this season they really had the feedback from season 1 to go with, and they were absolutely able to push the character somewhere people were going to like. It's also his last season with his shaved hair, which I think is adorable, so that's a bonus point in my book. Derek has a rough time this season, mostly because he's trying so hard not to fail as an alpha, but also because everyone around him is telling him he's failing as an alpha. Something that absolutely pisses me off is when Deaton tells him he's doing a bad job in the same conversation when he tells him that it was his job to look out for Derek's family after the fire. As if Deaton helped them literally at all. In the first season, Derek goes to him with questions and he just straight up pretends he doesn't know shit. I actually hate Deaton so much, and it really makes me fume when he stands there and says Derek is a bad alpha when he's had no help the entire series. Yeah, Derek makes a bunch of questionable decisions this season, and most of them turn out badly. This is nothing new and it's not going to change moving forward, but if anybody would do what they said they'd do and help the poor guy, then maybe he wouldn't fail so much. Honestly, fuck Deaton. I already talked about Allison and how I think she's overhated earlier, but I want to reiterate that I don't think Allison deserves the level of dislike that she gets from her actions this season. It's so obviously clear that she's not dealing with her mother's death well, and she had Gerard of all people in her ear the entire time. Cut the girl some slack. Lydia gets a huge boost in relevancy compared to the first season, and even then she's sort of dumped to the side for a little while towards the end of this one. After she resurrects Peter, the show just sort of forgets she's there until they need her to save Jackson. And now that Jackson isn't going to be around anymore, they'll finally get a chance to give her something good to do. Holland Roden is a talented actress. It's just a shame Lydia has been so sidelined up to this point. Before we jump into talking about Jackson, I want to talk a little bit about Matt. I lurk in fan forums and see discussions about different villains of the show, and I often see Matt ranked quite high on people's lists of worst villains or most hated characters. And I struggle to see how what he does quite compares to some of the other villains in the series. That's not to say I think what he does is okay. It is absolutely disturbing how he stalks Allison and the way he treats the people around him as if he's entitled to their deaths just because they were there when he drowned, but not really. Still, even compared to the villains from the first season and this season, I think Matt is one of the least awful villains. He's not a predator, he's not Gerard, and he's certainly not as manipulative as Peter. Plus, if we look at some of the villains in future seasons, he's not nearly as awful as some of them either. It's hard to be a great villain when you're surrounded by even greater villains. I think that might just prove that Teen Wolf has such a great setup with its bad guys. Even the minor ones like Mr. Leahy stand out in your mind. After that not so subtle transition, let's talk a little bit about Isaac. Like most people, I love Isaac. I liked Isaac from his first episode, and I like him in his last episode. I even remember that people used to ship Isaac and Danny because they were the only two unattached characters at the time. And yes, I'm bringing this up outside of the ship outlook section because I'm not going to mention it there. He's a really great addition to the cast, and it's a shame that he doesn't get very much to do other than be the sidekick for Derek or Scott here and there. I think my favorite moment is when he helps Scott at the animal clinic, but the scene when he finds out about Peter is also up there. Both Erica and Boyd are also great additions, but they're such non-characters this season, they don't really have any time to shine. We don't even learn Boyd's first name until next season. Of the betas, Isaac definitely stands out the most, and that's not just because he's introduced a few episodes earlier than they are. Lastly, we need to talk about Jackson. I mentioned in the first season video that we'd be revisiting the whole discussion about werewolf eye color, and we'll be doing that here. First, I think that Jackson as a character is much more interesting when he's not hiding behind Lydia or spending all of his time trying to figure out Scott's secret. The whole mystery in the first part of the season is interesting because we're just as confused as he is that the werewolf bite didn't really work for him, and even though it's so obvious from the beginning that he is the Kanima, we still doubt that it's him because we believe it when we see it isn't working. Then, at the end of the season, when he turns into a werewolf for real, we're sort of happy for him. It's bittersweet in the same way Styles is when he sees Jackson and Lydia together, but part of that is happiness, so. And of course, when he turns into a werewolf, his eyes are blue. I mentioned in the first season video, but it was leaked by alleged members of the crew that the original intention for some beta werewolves to have blue eyes rather than yellow is that they are born werewolves. Obviously, this doesn't really work for Jackson since he was bitten, but it goes a little deeper than that. The prevailing fan theory, which many people believe to be true and some say has been confirmed by writers, is that Jackson is actually Peter's son, and therefore has a werewolf bloodline. This isn't completely unreasonable to assume since we know that Derek had human family members in the fire. We can assume that not all children born to werewolves are guaranteed to be werewolves. We also know that the show has a tendency to shift around plot points when people leave, and Jackson is the first example of this. Since they stated they shuffled parts of Jackson's storylines off to other characters like Cora and Malia in later seasons. If you've seen the show, you would know that there's a character who is secretly Peter's kid. Spoilers, I guess, for that season, but if you're still here, then you definitely don't mind that. And allegedly, that is the result of some of that shuffling. They mention in this season that Jackson's birth parents were deliberately targeted in a potential murder, so even if he wasn't planned to be specifically Peter's son, it's generally accepted that he was meant to be the son of werewolves of some kind. When he leaves the show after season 2, they thought they had to change the reasoning behind the eye color thing, otherwise it would draw unnecessary attention to the fact that Jackson wasn't around anymore, and so in season 3 we get a different reason for the blue versus yellow thing. This is mostly hearsay since people claim this was sourced from former crew of the show, but I wasn't able to find anything concrete when researching for this video. It makes a lot of sense, like the puzzle pieces really fit together, especially when you look at Jackson as Peter's son, compared to the way that Peter's secret child is treated later, and how that whole plotline kind of goes with the whole like being attacked in a car and the alleged murder and all that sort of thing. So it really makes a lot of sense, but it's not 100% confirmed, so take that with a grain of salt. As for the rest of the discussion on Jackson, I really wish he stuck around, even if it was just for one more season. It's just so anticlimactic to have this full season where they fight tooth and nail to save him, only for him to become a werewolf and then leave between seasons. I remember when they first tell you in season 3 that he's gone, I actually laughed out loud in disbelief with how they chose to address it. Absolutely bonkers. Congratulations to Colton Haynes for booking a huge role on Arrow though. I think if you're looking at his career trajectory, he probably made the right choice. Okay, if we jump over to our ship outlook, we can see some of the major ships that season 2 has. Like last time, we'll take a look at the fan ships that are canon, some that aren't canon, and some that maybe aren't canon yet, but might be later. To start, we have the canon relationships. Like before, Scott and Allison is a big one, and unfortunately they lose quite a few points in my book this season. I think they were a lot more interesting as a couple on the fringes than they ever were when they first got together, but the way they treat each other once they start to argue in the middle of the season just doesn't sit right with me. Scott is constantly telling Allison that he's trying to protect her despite her saying she can handle herself, and neither one ever seems to really listen to the other. I think the two of them breaking up by the end of the season was the best case scenario, and I do actually like both of them better with other people, so. Next we have Jackson and Lydia. I will admit I find it mildly confusing how in one of the first episodes of the season, Lydia tells Allison that she has never experienced a true love like Scott and Allison's is, and yet by the end of the season, it is exactly the true love between her and Jackson that is able to take him back from the brink of Kanema death. Like I said in the first season video, I always sort of saw them more as using each other for status, and this season sort of reinforced that when Jackson just dropped her like a sack of bricks in the first episode. They're pretty low on my ranking, but they're definitely not the worst. Styles and Lydia as a ship get some more points from me this go around, especially since Styles seems to have lightened up a bit with his obsession. Their attempt to comfort her at the ice rink was really sweet, and I like that he genuinely stepped aside when she wanted to help Jackson, rather than trying to strong-arm her into his own opinion. Of the ones we've discussed so far, it's my favorite of the bunch for sure. Styles and Erica gets a little bit of attention from the show, but since Erica all but disappears, I won't go into much depth. We'll talk about it in Season 3 because they do that shuffling thing and give Erica's plot to someone else, but if her role was to be Styles' first girlfriend, then they failed pretty miserably. At first, it seems like she's going after Scott, and then she declares an episode later she's always had a crush on Styles, all while trying to make out with Derek. It really felt like the writers didn't have a clue what to do with her once she was confident, and it shows. Moving into non-canon territory, Boyd and Erica are quite a popular pairing, though I don't believe the show ever really confirms romantic attraction between the two. They hold hands a few times and I think it's implied, so I'll put it as sort of half canon and half not. I think it's mostly just because they enter the show at the same time and more or less spend all of their screen time together. Their biggest romantic moment isn't even in this season, but their overall presence in the show is just so small that I don't have much to talk about. I love the two of them as a couple in fan works, especially ones where one or both of them gets an increased role. I want more of them, and it's a shame we don't get it. Sheriff Stalinsky and Melissa McCall get another shout out from me here because they finally have a scene together, but once again it's more wishful thinking. I do like the two of them together though. Another ship, though I'm not confident it's due to this season, is Scott and Isaac. When it comes to gay ships for Scott, this is pretty much number one. They work really well together, and arguably Isaac works better as a packmate to Scott than he does to Derek, so it's no surprise that the two of them are shipped by fans. There aren't many moments I can identify as specifically romantic, but I could see arguments for when Scott teaches Isaac how to pull pain, and when the two of them work together starting in the last few episodes of the season. I don't hate it, and I sort of like it more than Scott and Allison this season, but since it isn't canon, it does take a little bit of a hit from me. I mentioned before that Danny has a minor ship with Isaac, but he also has one with Matt. I didn't hate this entirely at first, but since Matt is an Uber stalker and obsessed with Allison, I'm not really sure what they were going for here. Matt sort of flirts with Danny once or twice, and Jackson notices that Danny seems sort of into it, but it doesn't really go anywhere and then Matt dies. So pretty low on the ranking, I guess. I'd be remiss to get to the ship section and not bring up Sterek again. So I'm going to need you all to applaud my restraint in bringing it up again as few times as possible up to this point. This season really was the high point for the fan service of the show towards Sterek fans. That whole we're on a ship queerbaiting fiasco from the awards voting season happened during this season, and it also seems like there are a handful of moments deliberately added into the show in order to appeal to the Sterek shippers. I have a full Sterek deep dive coming pretty soon, probably in between the Season 2 and Season 3 videos, so be sure to check that out in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, I had to acknowledge the pool scene. It really is the moment that sailed 1,000 ships, to be honest. Plus, even the villain seems to ship them and says so when he paralyzes them on top of each other. I'm not sure exactly what it implies when the serial killing stalker is the representation of the shippers, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. If I had to place it, I still think it's going to take the very top. Sorry, not sorry. That's all the ships for this season, at least ones that progressed or new ships. If I was ranking them based on how I feel about them in Season 2, it would look like this. Sterek does take the top, but some of the other ships are more shuffled around this time compared to Season 1. I'm sure that Season 3 is going to be much wilder too, especially since there's two halves. Overall, I think Season 2 is quite enjoyable. When I watch with friends for the first time, this is usually the point where anyone who didn't like Season 1 will get hooked, and those that did like the first season will get extra hooked. It's still simple enough to not confuse you, but it builds so carefully on the lore from the first season that you just don't question the jump from werewolf to lizard monster. While we're here, I feel like we should also address one of the least believable parts of the series. Why on earth do people sign up to be cops in this county? It's like as soon as you put a badge on, you've signed your death certificate. Of course, there's also the whole thing where every single person in the town is a model, but I guess we just come to expect that. If you liked this video, hit the like button, subscribe, share with a friend, and be sure to keep your eyes out for both the Steric Deep Dive and the Season 3 video coming as soon as possible. Until next time.